In terms of more changes coming down the pipe, probably our biggest, most substantial part of the patch notes is always the balance changes that we have coming in. So, Charles Dunn, take us to the promised land. What balance changes do you have for us?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about all the class updates that we did for Season 9. And so my section, I'll be talking about some of the new stuff that came in that you may have seen on the PTR, but also talking about some of the adjustments we've made since the PTR. Some of the learnings, some of the feedback we've gotten, and how we've iterated since then. So at a high level, there's a few broader initiatives that we've done that really affect all classes in some ways that we're doing here for Season 9. The first one you probably saw a lot on the PTR was a basic skill buff. Listed about basically every basic skill in the game, and most of them were buffed rather dramatically. Some of them 2 or 3x their damage increase. The impetus here was that we wanted to look kind of comprehensively at the game as a whole, the wider balance, and think, are basic skills really fitting where they should in terms of their overall damage output and how they fit into builds? And really, they were just like well behind the curve.
Yeah.
We want them to feel much more impactful, be a bit more, feel better when you first get them, but also be easier to kind of build around as you go and build up your character. We buffed up the baseline versions of a lot of these skills, but we did take a look at some of the legendary and unique aspects that interact with them. Our goal wasn't to be like, basic skill builds, kind of like we saw with Spiritborn and Barb in the past. We didn't want those to be like, here, this is we're making them the new meta.
Yeah.
This is more around like rebalancing the whole game as a whole. And we started with basic skills, trying to establish a firm power budget for them. And we're going to be looking and doing these kind of passes on other categories of skills, such as core skills, ultimates, etc., in future seasons. That's going to be like an area of focus for us moving forward. We're just starting here with basic skills.
Yeah, it's like a health pass, really, on basic skills, and we'll be taking more looks at more categories.
Right. With the from the PTR, one big thing we noticed was that Pain Gorger's Gauntlets, one of the unique items that really empowers these basic skill builds, was definitely not living up to its billing. It didn't crit or overpower whenever its damage kind of echoed out, and it's supposed to be like a multiplier on your basic skill damage, but really it fell a lot short. So we've made an update so that now Pain Gorger's Gauntlets is going to be able to crit and overpower just like your basic skill damage. So that should definitely be a huge boon to those types of builds.
Yes.
Speaking of overpower, though, overpower was overpowered, and we have done some nerfs to it. For the past few seasons, overpower-based builds have been definitely dominating the top of the meta, and it was definitely crowding out builds that really couldn't utilize that, things like dot-based builds or others.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, on the PTR, we tested an 80% reduction in the additive damage calculation of overpower. Not to get too in the weeds here, but there's kind of like an additive amount of damage that's based on how much fortified life and maximum life you have built up. We've just removed that completely. We tried an 80% reduction in what it was, and we decided it's still too strong, it's still too complicated, and we just removed that portion. So now when you overpower, you're going to do up to 50% bonus damage, just like a critical strike, but that's kind of going to be the end of the calculation there. We still anticipate, if you really want to, the biggest damage number hits are still going to be when you crit and overpower at the same time, but it's not going to be that you must overpower or else nothing else matters.
Right.
It's just going to be in that same kind of bucket as critical strikes.
Yeah, there's a certain point where something becomes so powerful that occurs, where it's like, if you didn't do that, then nothing else matters. And that starts to kind of erode the whole game experience.
Yes. And finally, we did a pass on all the key passives in the game. Much like the basic skill kind of audit that we did, we looked at all the key passives and really wanted to look at some of the ones that were like outliers. They caused some of our builds that were 10, 100x stronger than other builds. A lot of times that came down to key passives that were scaling or interacting in ways that gave you far more benefit than some other key passives on other classes. And so some of those ones that had kind of that uncapped scaling, we added in caps to make sure that they don't get completely out of control. And ones that were like definitely underperforming, we did some rather substantial buffs to them to help bring them up to kind of parity across the board. So definitely I'll be touched on that a little bit later as we get into individual classes. So let's get on to the individual classes, starting with Barbarian. So our goals for Barbarian this season is definitely a meta refresh on exactly the Barbarian meta. For the past few seasons, we've seen a lot of Earthquakes, a lot of Dust Devils, a lot of the summons being really dominant. And those are cool, but a lot of the Barbarian's core fantasy is around hitting people with weapons, and so we decided, okay, we need to do some nerfs to earthquakes and some of those other effects that aren't quite as physical, hitting with weapons, and buff up things like Whirlwind and Hammer of the Ancients that are a lot more core to barbarians, base fantasy.
Absolutely.
With that in mind, we also got the new unique item, the Hooves of the Mountain God. Let's take a look at that here. This is the new unique boots item that is going to allow your basic skills, which I just talked about, to cleave. So once you hit maximum fury, you're going to start rapidly draining that fury, and while you're in kind of this draining state, your basic skills are going to cleave and do massively increased damage. And luckily, you're spamming out your basic skills. That is going to restore your fury and is allow you to keep in this state as long as you stay in combat and stay fighting enemies.
Yeah, and what I really love about this specific unique is that typically you try to solve your resource in a build, but with this, you try to stack as much of it as possible, so you can stay in the mountain god state, or whatever you want to call it, as long as possible.
Yeah, and you got to stay in combat. You got to stay hitting people with your basic skills to keep it going. It's really quite powerful, and I think it'll really enable some of those basic skill builds that we were talking about, especially with the updated Pain Gorgeous gauntlets.
Yes.
We've got a clip of this in action. Barb walks up to a big old pack of skeletons, hits them with bash. Good old bash skill cleaving through the hordes and throwing them against the side of the canyon here. Yes, very good. A new unique to enable basic skill builds. Not just bash, all of the basic skills will cleave with this. So find out which one works best for you.
Yeah, frenzy. Can I hear any frenzy enjoyers?
Yeah, indeed. All right, let's move on to Druid here. So the Druid updates this season were mainly focused around Pulverize as a kind of a main skill that we wanted to look at. I'll get more into that as we talk about the Rotting Lightbringer in a moment, the new unique that talks with Pulverize. But ever since the PTR, we also realized that it was still underperforming a baseline, so we've done some buffs to Pulverize just its raw damage output, as well as refactored some of the upgrades on it just to move around that to better work with the build with Rotting Lightbringer. But it wasn't just that. We also did a variety of other buffs on Druid. We know that Druid has historically, for the past handful of seasons, been probably the worst class in the game, certainly in terms of representation, how many people are playing it, how late into the end game, how strong they're getting. It's definitely fallen behind the pack.
Yes.
And so with that in mind, we've done buffs to a wide variety of the Druid builds. I can't just say any particular buff. It's a handful of legendaries and uniques and skills that got buffed up just to bring the whole class up a little bit. So let's take a look at that Rotting Lightbringer, that new unique. We did see this on the PTR, but it has been rather substantially reworked since then. We heard a lot of feedback that it wasn't quite as usable, it wasn't as good as it could be. So the new version of Rotting Lightbringer says that if no puddle is around you, then Pulverize is going to form a puddle of poison that guarantees its own overpower and deals a massive amount of its normal damage as poisoning over time.
Yeah, this is really excellent because you can just go around and just make a bunch.
Yes, it is no longer tied. It used to have like a 10-second cooldown, which felt really bad, where you would try to Pulverize and you're like, oh, the cooldown's not up, and then you move to the next pack and it doesn't work. It was very, it didn't work as well as you had hoped.
Yeah.
So with this new update, it should definitely work quite a bit better. And every time you do Pulverize, all of the puddles around you are going to splash some of their damage, because what's better than splashing poison all around? Let's take a look at this new version of Rotting Lightbringer in action. So you run up, you form a puddle, you move off to the side, you make a second puddle, you can form more than just two, and every time that you Pulverize, all of your existing puddles are going to do that little splash of AoE around them and pulse some more damage.
Yeah, so when you're in a room with just a ton of monsters, or like a strong room, for example,
Yeah.
you can just go around and make a bunch and have some fun in the sun. Or not the sun, because I guess you're in the dark dungeon.
Yeah, it is a nightmare
sun
dungeon.
and the poison comes with you.
Yeah, oh, how nice. Wonderful.
Okay, let's move on to the Necromancer here. The Necromancer, similar to Druid, had a variety of buffs, specifically to Golem builds, Bone builds, and Shadow builds. Some of these builds were definitely falling behind the rest of the pack on Necromancer and compared to other classes in the game. So we've done a handful of buffs to those builds since the PTR to bring them up and really help to make them a bit more competitive. Two of the outliers on Necromancer from last season were Soul Rift and Bloodwave, two of their ultimate skills that just were, Soul Rift in particular just did way too much for any one skill. Obviously it dealt damage, but then it gave you a barrier, it gave you resource, it gave you damage, increased all of your other damage output, refilled your potions, and feared enemies. So that's a lot of things for one skill to do. And we love ultimates doing a lot, but that was kind of one thing too many.
Yeah.
So on this season, we've removed the barrier generation from Soul Rift, and so if you want to get really tanky as a Necromancer, you're going to have to look for some alternate sources to make yourself a little tankier, alternate barrier sources as well.
Yeah, we want to give you all the tools you need to solve your problems, but we don't want you to solve all your problems through one of your tools.
Right. Yeah, Soul Rift was just doing a little bit too much for that. And that's why it was, kind of so dominant, so popular.
Yeah.
Blood Wave, another ultimate skill as well. That just did a ton of damage. Its damage output was exceptionally high.
Yes.
I think part of that was due to the overpower being so overpowered, and so some of the nerfs there would probably bring that down to size. So we expect Blood Wave to hopefully not be the absolute dominant way of playing Necromancer, and we hope that some of those other builds like Golem, Bone, and Shadow have a few other ways of playing. We've also got the new unique, the Hand of Naz. This is a pretty cool new way of playing the class, specifically Minion Necromancer. Let's take a look. So the Hand of Naz gives you more skeleton mages. So if you go all in on your mages, you sacrifice your warriors, you sacrifice your golems, you can now summon additional mages for each minion that you sacrificed. So you can have far more mages than before.
Yes.
And just like any good, RPG, your skeleton mages can get experience and level up.
Yeah,
so
let's go.
they attack 25 times, then they get to level up to a skeleton archmage. And when they're in the archmage form, they are harder to kill. They're going to teleport around to safety if they get attacked, and their attacks are going to occasionally shatter and deal bonus damage to the target and nearby enemies. We can take a look at this in action. You've got your big old backline of a ton of mages. You won't have your skeleton warriors. You won't have your golem if you really want to maximize your mages. So that really puts you, the Necromancer, as kind of being the front line for your army of minions. Kind of turns the traditional minion necro on its head a bit, whereas your minions are often the front line for you, and then you pump out the damage. In this kind of build, you're going to be the front lines trying to keep the enemies off your mages while they pump out the DPS from the back line.
Yeah, really, this makes it so you have a college of mages, one could say. And mages aren't the greatest at tanking, so, you got to figure that out yourself.
All right, we've got the Rogue up next. So the Rogue, we did some updates to Death Trap and Shadow Clone in this season. So much like Necromancer, where they had a couple of ultimate skills that were really dominant in the meta, specifically Death Trap and Shadow Clone on the Rogue. Death Trap was kind of like Soul Rift in a lot of ways, where it did a little bit too much of everything, did pull in, did damage, other damage increases. And the big problem with that from a balance standpoint was that it was very easy to be able to just hold down the Death Trap button and spam cast it.
Yeah.
That was due to a number of effects interacting to give you cooldown reduction on it and reset its cooldown, including whenever you overpowered or killed an enemy with it. It would help tick off some of that cooldown reduction. We've removed that functionality, so it's a little bit harder to get to that full zero cooldown Death Trap. If you are still really building your character out, you'll still be able to get there. It'll just be a little bit harder of a journey, similar to the philosophy on Soul Rift. We want you to be able to solve these problems, but it was a little too easy to do it on Death Trap and really short-circuited the progression cycle of building up your character and feeling that growth and that strength. Shadow Clone was doing a ton of damage, much like Blood Wave. And it kind of went a little bit against the fantasy of, your Shadow Clone should be augmenting your strength, and it should be kind of mirroring your damage output. What, in reality, based on what it was doing, was like you did a little bit of damage, and the Shadow Clone dealt a ton of damage.
Yeah, it felt more like you were the Shadow Clone.
Yes, it did feel like that. Shadow Clone mimics your effects, but it also changes some of the skill tags that it works with. So Shadow Clone is an ultimate skill. It is a cutthroat skill. So no matter what it's casting, that skill is an ultimate and cutthroat skill. It basically allowed it to access some extra multipliers, some extra bonuses. Baseline, there is a kind of damage penalty on the Shadow Clone, and we've kind of increased that so it doesn't deal quite as much percentage damage, but is still a good modifier to your damage output. And we've also added some damage reduction component to it. So the Shadow Clone kind of takes some of the hits for you, right? Takes some of your damage and gives you that damage reduction instead. We talked about key passive earlier. Victimize is a key passive on Rogue that while we have reworked, it was one of those ones that was either like super weak or super strong, depending on the precise tuning. And it really was struggled to get that into to balance it well against other options.
Right.
And so we've done a rework here where it's damaging vulnerable enemies is going to cause them to do a burst of damage, but then you also deal multiplicative increased damage to those targets after you burst. You trigger that victimize effect on them. And we think this will get it to a much healthier state where it's like more consistently useful rather than all or nothing. And the new unique for Rogue this season is the Death Mask of Nirmatrek. And this one works with your flurry builds. Let's take a look here. So the Death Mask, you can now overexert yourself while casting Flurry. And what does that mean? That is a new term to Diablo 4. It means that if you don't have enough energy, you're going to spend life instead to cast your Flurry. And when you do spend life to cast Flurry, it's going to increase its damage and your attack speed rather substantially for a period of time. So you do get to go real fast, attack real quick, but be warned, the faster you attack without any energy, the more life you're spending, the closer to death you're going to get.
It's called a death mask for a reason.
Right, we've got a clip of this in action. So you are running through, you are dashing to enemies around, and casting Flurry super fast, even when you are out of energy, and now your life total is going to start draining the more flurries you cast.
I never get tired of this clip. It's perfect.
It's so ludicrous.
It is a great clip. Really embodies that like fast, stabby, frantic style that rogues are known for.
Yeah.
And definitely, I love how this like turns your build crafting options on its head. Typically, you want to get give me tons of resource generation. But you don't necessarily want that here, right? You want to be on low resource so that you can trigger the spending life. Because this effect basically does nothing if you're not spending life. And for all those hardcore players out there, be very warned that this one, it won't actually kill you, but it can bring you down to about 8% life, at which point pretty much anything else will kill you.
It will certainly help you die, that's for sure.
Aizen, you were talking about running this on hardcore for next season, right?
I was. I might be a little crazy.
All right, let's move on to the Sorceress. So the Sorceress, we've got updates here to Lightning Spear was one of the big ones. Lightning Spear had been kind of dominating the Sorceress meta for quite a while. It was like really the premier build for a long time. And this had a really interesting situation where out of the box, Lightning Spear was kind of terrible, right? You look at this skill and you're like, okay, how much damage does it do? How many enemies does it hit? What's its cooldown? And you're like, oh, this is awful. Like, it doesn't do anything. And then you get Splintering Energy, the legendary aspect, and suddenly it goes from nothing to best skill in the game.
Yeah, and we don't want skills out of the box to feel useless. We want them to feel powerful and good. And we also don't want aspects to have to carry that much weight on their shoulders. It's not good for either the base skill or the aspect.
So in this season, we've buffed up the base values of Lightning Spear rather substantially. I think it was like 4 or 5 times increased damage. But we've looked at the Splintering Energy legendary and brought that down rather substantially. To be clear here, our goal is still that Lightning Spear, we do not want it to be the best way of playing Sorceress. It has had its time in the sun for a few seasons now. It's really been, I think it's time for some other options to rise up and be like some of the stronger builds on Sorceress. We still want it to be a viable way to play. We don't want to completely kill it to nothing, but it shouldn't be the absolute dominant or strongest way to play here Sorceress moving forward. To that point, we've updated Icefall and Firestarter. Icefall is a legendary Paragon node that works with your Frost skills. Those cold skills are going to do quite a bit more damage with this. It's just some numerical buffs there. And the Firestarter, that's a legendary aspect that works with your flame skills. You know, the other 2 builds outside of Lightning on Sorceress. Firestarter previously just did kind of a chunk of moderate fire damage, but wasn't anything special. Now it also gives you multiplicative fire damage, which is really good if you are picking, say, the Fire Infusion Catalyst for your Horadrim spellcraft.
Oh, true. Or some crazy new unique that might be making its way into the
game. A crazy unique like the Ophidian Iris.
Oh, whoa.
Let's take a look at the Ophidian Iris. This is the new unique amulet that works with your Hydra skill. It makes Hydra into a core skill, and it's always going to summon a 3-headed Hydra, and those Hydra's attacks explode on impact. Now, previously, you could build up effects that gave you more heads to your Hydra, and for every head above 3 that your Hydra would have had, instead it grows in size and deals multiplicatively more damage. We tested this out on the PTR, and one of the big points of feedback was that there's kind of two ways of building Hydra. You can build with more crit focus, like crit and fire, or more burning damage focus.
Yeah.
And previously, the affixes on the Ophidian Iris really tried to force you into the critical strike version of the build, and we've updated them here. So we removed that critical strike chance and added attack speed, which is good for both, and changed the ranks of the passive over to Primordial Binding, which is once again good for both, rather than giving you the critical strike pyromancy effect. Just being a bit more generic and allow you to play it whichever way you like and kind of equally support it. Let's take a look at this clip of the before and after in this terms of size. So on the left, you got your little piddly normal-sized Hydra. If you build up a whole bunch of bonus Hydra heads, you get the big boy Hydras on the right, whose attacks explode on impact. Obviously, they deal a ton more damage. They kill the enemies much faster. And it just looks a lot bigger and a lot more visually impressive.
They are absolute units.
They really are. You get to become a Hydra parent. And also, honestly, I've never felt bad for a Khazra test dummy before, but I feel kind of bad for this guy.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to playing with this one on next season.
Yeah, this will be. This is exactly what I'll be running for Season 9, Charles.
That's sweet. All right, let's move on to the final class, Spiritborn. So for Spiritborn this season, we've looked at updating the Razor Wings build. That's a build that has had some support, but never really quite got there. We've made some adjustments to some of the legendaries and that affect that build to really help bring it up and make it a bit more robustly supported. I want to talk a little bit about the Hunter. That's the Jaguar ultimate skill. We tested a change on the PTR where we, so currently on Season 8, and ever since it's launched, it had this mechanic where if you kill an enemy while the Hunter is active, it has a chance to reset its cooldown completely. So if you get lucky and you get a lot of kills, you can kind of spam cast Hunter until you, until you miss, basically.
Right.
We tested out a change on the PTR where instead of doing that, it would just give a more consistent amount of cooldown reduction. And this was, we heard loud and clear that that is not fun. It was really not what you wanted. Players really liked that kind of feast or famine version of Hunter, where it had that gameplay texture of constantly resetting and that mini game of making sure you maximize the number of kills for the short duration that it's active.
Yeah, it had really it evolved into like a core part of the spirit of the Jaguar, and we don't want to have to take that away.
Right. So this is one of the great things about testing these types of changes on PTR is that we're allowed to make these a bit like more dramatic changes, and then if they don't work out, we'll revert them. And so in this case, we decided to revert those changes back to what it was before. Now, for context, the reason we tried to do that change in the first place was that the Hunter was by far the most popular ultimate skill on Spiritborn. I think something like 90+% of Spiritborn players were using the Hunter. And that's not really healthy for build diversity. And we thought, okay, if we adjust its cooldown mechanic, that will be what we need to change. So instead, we looked at some numerical adjustments to it, so it doesn't have quite as many bonuses whenever it does function, but it still functions the same as before.
Yeah.
And in order to promote a bit more diversity, we've buffed up the other ultimate skill options. The other 3 Spirit Guardians now will give you other ways of giving multiplicative damage whenever you have them active. The Devourer will give you multiplicative poison damage. The Gorilla Ultimate, the Protector, will give you bonus damage while you stand in his area that he's pounding down on, gives you that area of power. And the Seeker, the Eagle Ultimate, will give you guaranteed critical strikes while it's active.
Awesome.
And finally, we've got the new unique item, a Balazan's Max Latel. We've got, I've been working on that pronunciation.
Nice.
So good.
Been working on that one. Nailed it. All right, so Balazan's Max Latel. We've got, let's take a look at that. This is the new Pants unique. It triggers when you attack enemies who are close, it'll trigger your Thorns damage as poisoning damage. So it's like poison and Thorns combination here. And every time that you've retaliated with Thorns, so you've gotten hit recently, then that poisoning damage is going to increase.
I really love this unique because it speaks to the spirit of Thorns, which is like, I must be hit, and then I retaliate.
Right.
But like expands on that, which is really cool.
Yeah, and it gives you more consistent value. Like if you're not getting hit, your Thorns was worthless. Now building up Thorns is still positive offensive value, even if you're not getting hit. But of course, getting hit and triggering those thorns is going to get you even stronger. On the PTR, this was definitely very powerful.
Very powerful.
Very, very strong. We did adjust its numbers down quite substantially. The percentage of thorns converted has been reduced. We still expect this to be a very powerful build, but it's gotten brought down a notch or two because it was by far the most powerful build that we saw on the PTR.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a clip of this in action here. Right, so you're standing in the middle, you're getting hit, you're clicking your defensive skill so that you can survive, and then once you get hit and stack that up, you can go around and apply bonus poisoning thorns damage to all of the enemies around you.
Those idiots. Why are they even hitting you?
I don't know. All right, and so that covers all of the class updates. Once again, make sure you check out the patch notes after the live stream here. Check out the blog. It's got all of the details. I kind of glossed over some of them because there's so many details to go into.
That's a lot.
Go and check those out for all of the very specific changes that we're making come Season 9. And can't wait for you to see, to try out all of these new effects.
Woo! Thank you for that, Charles. Take a bow. Yeah, the patch notes are absolutely massive this season. They won't be hitting in all languages following the stream. We're looking to have those published just prior to the start of the season on July 1st. So some languages will be available, but expect most of them towards the start of the season because the patch notes are absolutely massive. So like Charles said, dive into them, get those changes, and Charles, can we get that Spiritborn unique name one more time?
Balazan's Max Latel.
Balazan's Max Latel. Heard it here first. The man's a pro. The man's a pro.